Hine Mikan Shuvas Haminim. This is the response to heretics. The Rebbe over here says that now, hold on one second. Chapter 2. So give me somebody here in the class, a Tanya. I apologize. There you go. Okay, we start again. Hine kan shuvas haminim v'gilu shelish ta'usam ha'koifrim v'ashgacha pratis u'v'oisis u'mofsei ha'Torah. From this understanding is derived a response to the heretics and the root of the error of those who deny divine providence and the signs and wonders recorded in the Torah. Says Alter Rebbe that based on this idea that a person knows that every minute God creates the world anew, and these 22 letters and these 10 utterances that God said, let there be light, etc., recreates the world every moment anew. Through this, you're able to appreciate the concept of Hashgacha Pratis, that everything is divine providence, that God cares about every human being, and that nothing happens by chance. There's a famous story of the Baal Shem Tov. I'm sure you've heard it many times. When the Baal Shem Tov was teaching this concept to his disciples, and he said to them, you should know everything is Hashgacha Pratis, everything is divine providence. God cares about not only every human being, but God cares about also every animal and every blade of grass. They tell the Baal Shem Tov, how is this possible? What do you mean? And Baal Shem Tov said, come, I'll show you. And at that moment, he said, watch. A wind came and blew, and a leaf fell off the tree, and the leaf turned over X amount of times, and it stopped. Baal Shem Tov said, go and look under the leaf. And they went and they walked, and they picked up the leaf, and under the leaf was a worm. They said to the Baal Shem Tov, what does this mean? Baal Shem Tov said, it's very simple. You see, everything is divine providence. God cares about every human being, about every animal, and every blade of grass. So this worm was in the sun, and it was getting very, very hot, and it couldn't move. The sun was drying out the worm. So it was calling out to God, God, please save me. So what did God do? God caused the wind to blow, and a leaf to fall off a tree and to turn over X amount of times, not one time too much and not one time too little. So it would stop exactly on top of the worm. And now it would give the worm the ability to regain its strength and to survive. If this is true for a worm, how much more so it's true for any animal, a bigger animal, a larger animal, like a cow, and how much more so for a human, and how much more so for Am Yisrael. So this is only true, this concept is only believed if a person considers the fact that every moment God is recreating the world anew. And therefore, similarly, when it comes to miracles, if God is involved with nature and he's involved with creation, every moment he's creating the world. So now, if the Jewish people happen to be at the Sea of Reeds and they have to go across, it's very easy for God to say, let's split the water. He doesn't have to come down from his high throne and come down to the earth. Hey, what's going on over here, guys? You need some help? I'll split the sea for you. It's more natural. He's part of nature. He sees what's happening every moment, and automatically the sea splits. But if you think and believe that God created the universe and then he left, he's no longer here, it's much more difficult to comprehend these two ideas. And here the Alter Rebbe goes on to say as follows, that these heretics who don't believe that God creates the world every moment anew, and therefore they don't believe in the fact of divine providence, that God is constantly involved and cares about every human being, and that God creates miracles in the Torah. Shetayim b'djuman hakezev shemedamin ma'aseh Hashem ma'aseh havaya eis shemayim v'aretz. The ma'aseh enish v'tach v'loisach. They err with the faulty analogies in that they compare the work of God, the maker of heaven and earth, to the work of man and his schemes. What does that mean? He goes on to give a mashal, gives an example. For once a smith fashions a vessel. The vessel no longer requires the hands of the smith. Even when the smith's hands are no longer upon it, and he walks about into the marketplace, the vessel continues to exist. The vessel still exists in the same exact form and image as when it left the smith's hands. That is how these fools imagine the creation of heaven and earth. However, says the Alter Rebbe, however, they are blinded because however, there's a major distinction between man's creative work and the schemes, which consists of making one thing out of another, of merely modifying the form and shape of raw material, of fashioning an ingot of silver into the shape of a vessel. To the creation of heaven and earth, which is an existence out of nothingness, ex nihilo. So therefore they say, look, why does God have to stay constantly with the earth and the world? God could have created the world and left, just like a silversmith creates a vase or a vase or a becher or a candlestick and leaves. So too, God also leaves. Why must we say that God is constantly recreating the world anew? As we said already on chapter number 1. Now, in truth, just to ponder this for a moment, in reality, God could have created the world in such a fashion. He could have allowed the world to go on autopilot, and he could have been like a silversmith that said, look, I'll create the world, and now I'll leave. But the fact is, based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and as he will further explain here in this chapter, that God did not want it to be that way. On the contrary, he did want it to be created every moment anew. And the reason is to show the world and to show every human being his concern for us, that he is constantly thinking about us. He is constantly concerned about us, that we are important to him. And therefore, every action that we do that is good, he appreciates. And every action that we do, God forbid, that is not so good, he does not appreciate. And he is constantly concerned about our needs, and he wants us to succeed. And therefore, we have to constantly be joyous, knowing that God is always with us at all times, and not be afraid and have anxiety that what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen the day after. Rather, as it says in the Code of Jewish law, Shivisi Hashem l'negdi samim, place God always in front of you, for God is always there with you. So this is the way God created the world, that it should run in a way that every moment he's recreating, every moment he's concerned about you. Every moment he makes sure that this leaf will cover you and protect you from all harm and from all challenges. And if there is a challenge, it means he wants you to have that challenge. And he wants you to work through that challenge. And he wants you to become stronger because of that challenge. The Alter Rebbe now goes on to say, on the bottom of page 53, in chapter 2, in the Steinsalz Tanya, who Pella Godly Yesu, you should know. Even though there's a terminology that says you cannot teach an old dog new tricks, but here, the Alter Rebbe says a little different. He says, creating the world every moment anew is even greater than changing the nature of the Red Sea. creating the world every moment is a greater miracle than splitting the Red Sea. People try to find logic that there was no miracle, it was nature. The Jews know when it was a low tide, and that's when they crossed the Red Sea, which besides the fact that it's totally logical, the whole approach, because the Egyptians that were technologically the most advanced country in the world and scientifically most advanced, knew exactly about the low tide and the high tide. And these slaves, who theoretically one can argue were not so intellectual and knowledgeable, knew more about the low tide than the Egyptians. And they knew when to cross, and the Egyptians didn't know when to cross. And therefore they went at the wrong time and they were wiped away by the high tide. So anyone who wants to believe this nonsense could believe it. Now, the Rebbe says over here an interesting fact, that in truth it's easier for God to split the Red Sea than create the universe. So if you believe in the creation, if you believe that God creates the world every moment anew, what's the big deal to believe he split the Red Sea? So if you don't believe God creates the world, and if you believe maybe God left the world, and now he has to come back and split the Red Sea, okay, it's like a big job. But if he's every moment creating, what's the difference if he makes the water flow this way or make the water flow that way? Let's see it inside. This idea of creation, ex nihilo, is greater than the splitting of the Red Sea. For instance, where God caused the sea to recede with a strong east wind all night long, and the waters were split and stood upright like a mound and a wall. And if God would have stopped the wind, so in other words, the wind seems to be holding up the water. If he stops the wind, the water is going to now, because of its fluidity, go back down. So if God would have stopped the wind, even for an instant, the waters would have reverted and flowed downward in their natural way. They would undoubtedly not have stood like a wall. Even though this natural tendency of water to flow downward is also a novel phenomenon created from nothingness. For a stone wall stands upright by itself without the support of the wind. But that is not the nature of water. And therefore, if God could do that, and God needs the wind to blow every moment, so the water should stand up like a wall. And if he stops blowing for one moment, the water is going to return to its fluidity. Surely when it comes to the world, when he's creating nothing into something, he has to recreate the world every moment anew. If not, the world is going to return to nothingness. Now, there's another point over here. The Rebbe points out that there are actually two creations in water. There's the creation of the water, number one. And number two, the creation that the water is fluid. It's not that automatically water is fluid. Water could have been ice, could have been static. So God creates water and he creates fluidity. Two miracles. Now, for God to make the water stand still, what does he have to do? He changes the nature of the water. So he takes a nature of the stone and he puts the nature of stone into water. But what's happening here is it's yesh v'yesh. It's something from something. A nature of stone, he now puts into the nature of water. So therefore, because what happened by the splitting of the Red Sea was not ex nihilo, was not a new creation, he simply took the nature of the stone and he applied it to the nature of water. And yet we consider that to be a marvel. We go, wow, it's amazing, unbelievable. If that's the case, when God creates the world every moment from nothing to something, even a greater marvel. We should be even more excited about this reality. And therefore, surely, regarding the creation and the existence from nothingness, ex nihilo, which transcends the laws of nature, and is even more astonishing and wondrous than the splitting of the Red Sea. Surely, then certainly upon the withdrawal of the Creator's power from creation, God forbid, the creation would literally revert to absolute nothingness. Rather, the force of God, the force of the Creator, must constantly be within the creation to grant it life and sustain it at all times. And this force, what is the DNA of creation? What is the force that creates the world every moment anew? Is none other than the letters of the 10 utterances through which heaven and earth was created. And now the Alter Rebbe introduces a beautiful idea, something that we can live with and think about and meditate upon every day in our prayers, in our blessings. Alter Rebbe says this is the meaning of the verse. It's from the Nehemiah, but rather we also say this every day in our prayers. The Ata Machaya es Kula. Right? You know where you say this? Between Baruch Shamar and Yishtabach. By Baruch David. There's a prayer by Baruch David. Over there it says, the Ata Machaya es Kula. You, God, you give life to everything. It says the Alter Rebbe, Articulation Machaya Mahave Dahaini Yesh Ma'ayah. Says the Talmud, don't read you give life, but rather mahava. Mahava means you cause to be. You bring it into reality every moment. You are creating this from nothing into something. So it's not only like a soul that comes into a body. The body exists without the soul. And the soul animates the body. No. The Atem Mechayeh. You not only sustain the world like a soul to a body, but rather mahav. You are creating the entire world ex nihilo, nothing into something. How? In the same verse, you find the answer. V'ata you. We take the word you very lightly, but here the Alter Rebbe introduces a beautiful concept. The ata you is the letters Aleph and Taf and Hey. Aleph is the first letter of the Aleph base. Taf is the last letter of the Aleph base, implying that from Aleph to Taf, it's from the 22 letters of the Aleph base, that the Ata Machaya, that you create the whole world, nothing into something every moment anew. And furthermore, what about the Hey, the letter Hey? The Hey, Ata in Mechilas Oasis, Ma'alev Ata, the Hey, Moitzois Apeh, Bekir Oasis. The Hey represent the 5 organs of articulation. When we form our words, when we talk, the letters that come out of our mouth are divided into 5 different locations: the throat, the palate, the tongue, the teeth, the lips. These form the 22 letters. These 5 organs basically create a stop sign. It's Gevura. These 5 organs represent the 5 powers of Gevura, of severity, which says that God's word should end. If not, it will continue to create more and more and more and more unlimited creation. So within the letters, even though the letters already are a vessel, which therefore limit God's light, so too these 5 organs limit God's light even more, so that you human beings and creations are finite and they're not infinite. Now we can argue and say, what do you mean? God said, let there be light. God is a person. God said. God is not a person. He doesn't say. Although God is not a body, the Torah categorically states about him, the Lord spoke, and the Lord said, or God spoke, and God said. where Hashem spoke, and I said, what is this? The idea of God speaking is when you speak to your neighbor, what you're doing is you're revealing what's inside your heart. What I think, you don't know. What I say, okay, hopefully I'm telling you the truth. So if I want to reveal something to you, I can't just think and say, okay, you see what I'm thinking? No, I don't see what you're thinking. I have to express it verbally. I got to articulate it. So if I say, I like you. Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you. You like me. Thank you very much. I like you too. Or I hate you. Okay, well, I guess if you hate me, I should hate you too. But the point is, when you say something, you're revealing what you're thinking. So when we say God says, does it literally mean God has a mouth and he's moving his mouth and he's saying something? So here in Chassidus, we say what it means when God says something is that he expresses himself, he reveals what he wants to do. Just like words, articulation reveal to the listener what the sayer is saying. The same is true on a spiritual form. When we say God is speaking, means he makes his desires known. And therefore, when he created the world, let there be light, it meant he wanted that there should be light. And God's thought, as you know that there are letters in speech, there's letters in writing. When you write a Sefer Torah, so you put the letters on parchment. When you speak, there are letters through your speech. And when you think, you also have letters in your mind. God's letters in his mind already make it reveal. When he wants something, I want an apple, it appears. A human being says, I want an apple, he can want all day. No one's going to know. But when God says, I want an apple, it happens. So the idea of God speaking, says the Alter Rebbe, means his galus, the revelation of these 22 letters in the world. And it starts with, he says, this represents the revelation of the 22 supernal letters to the Nevi'im, to the prophets, which becomes enclosed in their intellect, and their understanding. When God shows them a prophecy. And similarly, when they have a thought. And that is the Spirit of the Lord spoke through me, and his word is on my tongue. So when a prophet gives over the word of God, is God speaking through the prophet. We say this emphatically, pertaining to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? When it came to the 10 Commandments. The Talmud tells us after the first 2 commandments, the Jews died. Each commandment, Anochi, I'm God your Lord, the Jews died. God resurrected them. He said, Lo yeh lecha, you shall not have any other gods before you. Again, they died. Because God's word was so overwhelming that the human body couldn't comprehend it. And in a more Kabbalistic vernacular, when the human body saw the holiness of God's letters and God's words, they ascended and they became one with God. They said to themselves, why do I need to stay down here in this physical world? I want to connect with that spirituality. So there was a level of spiritual death because the souls left their body in excitement, through ecstasy, and they became one with God. So God now resurrects them twice. And they say to God, this experience of dying and being resurrected is too much for us. Moshe, you speak to us. How is Moshe able to speak to 600,000 people, or rather men, with women and children, 2 to 3 million people from a mountain? There's no microphones. Rather, God spoke through his throat. He became a vessel for God. And the same is true every prophet who comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. When they spoke, God spoke through their throats. And in truth, as Chassidim, and in particular Chabad Chassid, we know that when the Rebbe said a Chassidic discourse, he would take out a handkerchief and he would put it around his fingers and hold it like this. And other Rebbes would hold on to tablecloths. And when they were asked why they did that, they would say, when you say a maimer, God is speaking through your vocal cords, and it's possible that the soul will leave the body, and therefore they need to hold on to something physical so that the soul will stay down in the body. So this is the idea that God can express himself through the intellect of the prophet, and even more through the mouth of the prophet. In similar fashion, in a similar fashion, the letters become enclosed in the creations, as it is written, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, by the breath of his mouth, all of their hosts. So this is the idea that these letters are now enclosed in these creations. So theoretically, as we spoke last week, that if you have the eyes to see, when you look at a table, you can see the letters of God in the table, the Shin, the Lamed, the Ches, and the Nun, Shulchan, that would create the table. So the Hebrew word of Shulchan, which is table in Hebrew, those are the letters that right now are manifested in the table and are recreating the table every moment in the However, there's a big difference between when God is manifested in the head or the brain of a prophet, or when God speaks through the prophet, and in contrast to when God creates a chair or table. Even though primarily they all come from these 22 letters, but there's a big difference in how these letters are revealed. When it comes to the prophet, the letters are much more spiritual. When it comes to the table, however, the letters have to undergo many symptomim, many contractions until it becomes hidden in the table. So that when you look at the table, you don't see God. You only see the physical object. But great tzaddikim are able to see the letters in the table. A famous story once at a Fabrengen, the Rebbe Rashab was talking to his disciples, and it's known when the Rebbe Rashab Fabring, his son, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, sat in front of him, and he was demanding that everything that God creates, the letters are in that object. And he felt they weren't believing him. He says, you know what, I'll show you. You see this plate? If I take out the letters of God from this plate, the plate will disappear. And his son was sitting there and says, Tati, don't do it. Don't do it. They're not going to get it. They're not tailing. They're not vessels for it. They won't chap it. They won't get it. So a tzaddik, when he looks at the chair, he doesn't see a chair. He sees the letters of a chair. He looks at a table, he sees the godliness in the table. But we, simple mortals, we see a table, unfortunately, we think that's difficult. We think it's a piece of wood. Because our brain is like a piece of wood. But those who have the capacity to see, or at least to meditate and to understand what the reality is, one has a deeper appreciation for everything that surrounds it. So when it comes to the words of creation, that however, this the clothing of the letters in the creations only comes about through many immense transmutations until they descend to the corporeal world of Asiya, of action. Whereas the comprehension of the prophet in the world of Atzilus emanation, which becomes clothed in the world of Bria creation, as we discussed many times, there are four basic worlds. The world of Atzilus is the highest, then you have the world of Bria beneath it, then the world of Yetzirah, then the world of Asiya. When a prophet sees prophecy, he is seeing the letters of Atzilus, how they are enclosed in the world of Bria. When we see a table, the letters went from Atzilus to Bria to Yetzirah and Asiya, went down already 4 stages. And each stage is millions of light years away from the other. And therefore, it's very difficult for us to comprehend this idea. So this is the basic concept of chapter 2. In other words, once a person believes and understands that God creates the world every moment anew, it's very easy to comprehend and appreciate the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov that everything is divine providence. And it's also very easy to comprehend that there's a miracle. And you don't start looking for excuses. Oh, it wasn't really a miracle. It was low tide. Because if God is creating the world every moment anew, and he can do that, then a miracle for him is nothing. It's less than creation. Rather, these 22 letters that are in the Torah, the 22 letters of creation, recreate the world every moment anew. And not like a potter who, after he finishes making a vase or a becher or a candlestick, leaves and it continues to remain intact, but rather God, similarly to the splitting of the sea, needs to send the wind every moment. He needs to constantly create the world every moment, ex nihilo. To end with a story. It was 1759. Baal Shem Tov sends a letter with one of his disciples to Rabbi Chaim Rappaport, who was a big goin, who originally was part of the opposition. He was misnagid originally and later became a chassid. And he told Rabbi Chaim Rappaport, on this day, on Wednesday, I want you to go out into the forest outside of your city, take with you a Rambam, study the first 4 chapters of the Rambam on the laws of brachot, and then you should daven mincha and come back. And while you're studying these 4 chapters of the Rambam intensely, you should write down all the chedushim, all the novelties that come to your mind, so you don't forget it. So that Wednesday approached, and Reb Chaim, together with the student of the Baal Shem Tov and a few other people, went and traveled from their city, from the shul, to the forest. The forest was about an 8-mile ride, and therefore should have taken a very short while to get there, but many, many challenges happened on the way. First the horse died, and then the wheel broke, and then the axle broke, and then the reins broke. The Satan was working very hard against them getting into the forest. And when they came into the forest, there was an area of an open field, as Baal Shem Tov described to Reb Chaim in the letter. And there he went, and he sat down, and he took a Rambam, and began to learn. For 4 hours, he learned 4 chapters of the Rambam. Now, theoretically, he could do it in an hour, if not less. But he learned it very intensely, and he was a goyin, he was a genius, and he began to write down his chedushim, his novelty. And it was a hot day. He asked one of the chevre, one of the students, to please find him some water. And so the student went and searched, and he found a well, a stream. And they filled up a cup of water, and they came back to Reb Chaim, made a bracha, shahakel, niyah, b'dvarei, that everything that is in existence is created by God's speech. That's what we say as the bracha, shahakel, niyah, b'dvarei, with your speech. You are recreating every moment anew this water. And he drank from the water. And then he asked for more water. He washed his hands before mincha, and he prayed mincha. They went back, and a few weeks later, when Reb Chaim visited the Baal Shem Tov, he told the Baal Shem Tov that he fulfilled the Baal Shem Tov's wishes, and ever since then, he was blessed that his mind opened up, and he has a better comprehension of the study of Torah. And he wanted to thank the Baal Shem Tov for giving him this chus, the opportunity to be able to go and fulfill this mission, and at the same time to have a personal benefit, because ever since then, his learning is on a totally new level. Baal Shem Tov said, let me tell you what happened. You see, where you went, there lived a Jew who died 117 years ago. And that Jew is a great Torah scholar. The problem was, he was also an atheist. And he violated all the sins in the Torah. Because of that, the Torah that he studied did not have the merit to be elevated. But after 117 years, it was finally declared that now his Torah study, the words, the letters that he pronounced and studied, can now return to God and be elevated to its maker. And you had this chus by the fact that you studied Torah on that location, where he lived and where he was buried, to be able to elevate his Torah study. And therefore you are also blessed to now have a deeper comprehension of the study of Torah. Because when you help someone else, you really help yourself. And furthermore, he said, you fulfilled a second task. You see, when God created the earth, it says he divided the waters. Some water went above and other water remained below. The waters that are below cried to God. They cried out to God, God, we want to be with you. We don't want to be down here. So God promised them, look, you know what? I'll make a deal with you. Once a year, on the holiday of Sukkot, we're going to take you, your water, and we're going to pour it on the Mizbeach. It's going to be the most festive experience of the entire year when we pour the water on the Mizbeach. So that's going to be one way to pay you back. The Medrash goes on to say that also the salt that comes from the water will be on the table. You have to put the bread into the salt at all times. And every sacrifice on the altar is going to have salt. But in truth, said the Baal Shem Tov, that every spring has the same complaint. Why am I down here, not up there? So from the beginning of creation, the spring that you were next to was crying out to God every day, God, why am I here? I want to be close to you. But on that day, when you took that water and you made a brach on it, and then you took that water and you washed your hands for mincha, you elevated that water. And now the water is happy. And the same is true every day and every time that a person, a yid, takes a cup of water, he makes a brach on it, or he immerses in the mikveh, or washes his hands in the morning before prayer. The water now becomes satisfied. The water now is at peace. And we fulfill the purpose of creation of why that water was created.